say hello to everybody and hope that there are people listening and watching and being part of what we're doing. And we will welcome people to our NHL Draft chat and say we are just lining up our panelists to get everybody in. And we can't wait to start telling you about NHL Draft 13, which should be pretty exciting for hockey fans because it's going to be quite a year. Not only do we have an outstanding draft class led by Nathan MacKinnon and Seth Jones, we also have salary cap issues, we have buyouts, we have trades, we have teams that are completely coming off of underperforming seasons that are ready to blow it up and start all over, and they're going to have to do a lot of work. And it might all start on the draft floor in beautiful New Jersey. So that's what we're talking about. My name is Rob Granitstein from Canada.com, and I will be your host for today. With me so far, I have Sean Fitzgerald, sports reporter from the National Post, who's here with me in Toronto. Hello, Sean.
Hello, Rob.
Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Sean has been covering the Leafs and other teams far and wide for many years, so he'll bring lots of insight there, as well as a little capology maybe. We'll see how it goes, see where we're going to find ourselves on draft day, which is Sunday. And Sean, I got to tell you, there's nothing like holding a draft on the Sunday of a long weekend in New Jersey.
No, I think it's the thing that hockey fans wait for the most. You go through the cold and, watching hockey inside, and then when it gets really nice and warm on a Canada Day long weekend, you really can't wait to tuck into a whole bunch of people going up to a stage in suits while you're watching on television at home.
I do remember, I got to tell you, when July 1st was the big day for free agent signings, traveling around in a car in BC, checking my BlackBerry at the time, wondering who had been signed and by what team, and quite frankly, it was pretty exciting even though I wasn't watching it on TV because that was a day when there was so much action, and I think Sunday could be just like that again.
Yeah, no, I think the other interesting thing is this year there actually could be some interest. If you looked at, strictly speaking, the free agent pool this year, pre-buyouts was pretty thin. There aren't going to be a lot of teams that are going to be able to help themselves, patch up a lot of holes because there just isn't the marquee talent. There's no, there's no Ryan Suter on the market this year. But I think, with compliance buyouts that, Vinny Lecavalier now the potential to be out there. I mean, he's old. He's not what Vinny Lecavalier once was. But, he's now in play. That could really make for a couple of crazy days if you want to stay inside on Canada Day weekend when it's still nice and warm outside.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. We have lots of players to talk about. We're waiting for Pat Hickey to join us. He is in the swamps of New Jersey, beautiful Newark, and we're hoping to have him with us soon. And we're also hoping to have Ed Willis from Vancouver in the Vancouver province join us. And when we do, we will bring both of them in to be part of our chat. And I'm just seeing that Ed's about ready to join us, it appears.
In fairness, Vancouver is 3 hours behind us, so it only makes sense that he'd be a little bit later joining this.
Okay, so we'll give him a little bit of leeway, and we will give Pat a bit of a push. There was the NHL Prospects Lunch today where sports reporters were able to meet some of the top prospects. Pat was there briefly, but left because, of course, the Montreal Canadiens this year are not picking at the top of the draft for once. They are picking down closer to the bottom, so it'll be a crapshoot to see who they take. Sean, you've seen a lot of hockey. It looks, and to me, it seems pretty clear from what's coming out of Colorado. Nathan MacKinnon is going #1. What do you think of this player?
Well, I think it's an interesting mix that Colorado will have, that you look at their core of talent and you stack it up, projecting long-term against, of that core, what other team in the league would you want, most to have going forward? Edmonton's a fairly obvious choice, but it's not as distant a race as you might think. That, between the stockpile of youth that Colorado could have, that you throw Nathan MacKinnon into here, that could be a heck of a team, and, not a super long amount of time. Certainly within the entry-level contract period of somebody like a Nathan MacKinnon when he does make the team.
Yeah, it's it's going to be pretty exciting. Of course, Patrick Waugh is already talking about it. Patrick Waugh, of course, being the new coach of the Colorado Avalanche, is already talking about McKinnon being his third-line center on day one. Not bad for a guy who hasn't been drafted yet.
That's not so bad. I mean, it's tough to look at this draft and just really, I think, digest how much talent there is available. And you look at the recent NBA draft, the Canadian got taken first overall, so that's a big thing. But, everybody was, pointing out how there's, I don't know if the dearth of talent, but certainly high-end talent was lacking, that, you're going to be able to fill your team with some role players and some people who could really help you, but not at the top end. You look at this NHL draft and some of the players who are available, the fact that we're talking about Nathan McKinnon going first overall, while he's an incredible talent, you can't overstate the talent beneath him. That Seth Jones on a lot of draft boards is still the top player on a lot of key boards, including some at TSN, some respected talent evaluators. Jonathan Drouin. You go down. This harkens back, that magical 2003 draft where just about everybody who was taken in the first round is now an impact player in the league.
Yeah, it really does. And to me, I look at it, and I got to tell you, this is exciting because there is so much talent, and quite frankly, it's a lot of talent that we've seen. It isn't a lot of European talent that maybe Canadians aren't used to seeing. We've seen a lot of Seth Jones this year, including in the Memorial Cup. We've seen a lot of Jonathan Drouin, including the Memorial Cup and the World Juniors, in fact, for both of them. We have seen a lot of Nathan McKinnon. We've also seen, for Toronto fans in this area, we've seen a fair bit of Max Domi, who is Ty's son, who's projected to go still top 10, isn't it, Sean?
Yeah, no, we've seen Max Domi for quite a long time, probably before he's even playing hockey. He's just been around. It's just a Domi. And he's interesting because, the name is one thing, but he does have a lot of skill. And the funny thing is, the old man, later when Toronto picks, whether the Leafs would actually take the legacy name of the Domi.
Yeah, and to me, that's a big question. Will they be able to trade up? Will they be able to get in there?
Or if they want to, really.
Or if they want to, that's a lot of pressure for that kid.
Yeah, and I think you also wonder about the rebuilding process, that they've got a lot of different holes, and their window, whether that would mesh up with when Max Domi would really emerge as a player. This all comes into play. They have a lot of questions, especially up front.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. We will go team by team, hopefully. We'll also be joined, as we've said, by Ed Willis from the Vancouver Province, hopefully soon, and Pat Hickey in New Jersey. But as we continue down the list and as we continue to look at players, I think one of the things that I'm interested in is when you get to Edmonton. And Edmonton is a team that clearly has a ton of talent, and we can't wait to see what happens there, especially because they've just blown it up a little bit on the managerial side. Coach is out, and Dallas Eakins is in, and the general manager is out, and Craig McTavish is in. And McTavish has promised bold moves. Sean, what do bold moves mean for the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, they have, again, you look at team with questions. Do they have a full confidence in Devin Dubnyk as their goaltender? There was some talk, heaven forbid, of, are the Oilers potentially going to look at somebody like Brizgalov and hopefully no. But, do they have confidence in that? Edmonton, definitely a team that needs to upgrade on its back end. You look at their league forwards. We're talking about the core of teams going forward. Colorado having a whole bunch of youth, and certainly, whatever they choose to do with this number one pick. But, Edmonton, Taylor Hall, I watched him when he won his second Memorial Cup with the Windsor Spitfires. That would have been 3 years ago now, before he was taken first overall. And that kid can fly. That's a statement of the obvious. He has incredible talent. And he has an incredible sort of drive and ability to become one of the very best, I think, power forwards in the league. The one thing that I'd wonder about Taylor Hall long term is just because he is, borderline reckless at times in the way that he plays, in the way that he approaches the puck, and the fact he moves at such high speed at all time, how that will happen, how that will impact his health going forward. But you have him. You have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. You have Neil Yakupov. Certainly, you have Jordan Eberle. You have just a tremendous depth of potential there. But without a defense that's capable, certainly of alleviating some of the pressure on their own end, not to mention, on a breakout, getting that forward group the puck. And then a goaltender who Devin Dubnyk certainly showed potential, but if he's going to be the guy long term, these are questions that the management team's going to have to figure out.
Yeah, I think they're big questions, and to me, the questions continue as they try to decide, okay, so what do we do with all this talent? What is a bold move, and what does Dallas Eakins really want to do with this team? It's interesting times for Edmonton. I mean, I recall last year after the lockout, some of the prognosticators were saying the Oilers could be a team that could not only just make the playoffs, but really make a stink in the playoffs, and instead they just stunk. And
well, they got off to a fairly, they had flashes of potential in the beginning, and then I think that, their structural deficiencies really started to show. Dallas Eakins is a guy who, with the Marlies, was really able to introduce a system and adapt that system. When Randy Carlyle, found himself with some free time at the beginning of the season with the lockout, they adopted the Toronto Maple Leafs system, and he was able to adjust that. And with a roster that was just picked clean after the lockout ended, he was still able to get the Marlies very deep in the playoffs.
I'm just going to stop you there, Sean, because we do have 3 hours behind us, but here's Ed Willis from the Vancouver province. Thank you for joining us.
3 hours and 15 minutes worth of untold grief letter trying to master Google+, but we are here and we are ready to go, Rob.
You appear to be the master of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex, for me, by the way. The key, always use the Mac. There's a free plug for Mac right there. Use the Mac, don't use the PC.
Sean Fitzgerald is with us as well, and we have been
Fitzy, how you doing, man?
Eddie, doing well.
Good.
We have been talking a lot about the start of the draft. The Vancouver Canucks, of course, are not picking at the start of the draft, but will be one of the most interesting parties that really are part of the draft. And I'd say there is a lot of pressure on Mike Gillis this year to improve those Canucks. And when you fire your coach, pressure's on, wouldn't you say?
Oh, no, totally. But, I mean, they're picking 24th in the first round. They're not going to get any instant help there. What they have to do is replenish their reserve list because they haven't drafted well at all in the last 5 years under Gillis's watch. And as a result, the depth of the organization has been eradicated. It's kind of interesting, Rob. I really liken the Canucks position this year to where they were in 2003, and there's a lot of parallels, I think, between this draft and the 2003 draft, which is regarded as one of the, if not the richest draft in NHL history, certainly among the top 2 or 3. But the Canucks were in a similar position. They were kind of in the process of turning over the Marcus Naslund, Todd Bertuzzi, Brendan Morris, and Ed Jovanovski team. They didn't have a lot, and in that very good draft, they got Ryan Kessler with, I think, the 23rd pick of the first round, who, of course, has turned into a Selke Trophy winner, 40-goal scorer when he's at his best. He's battled injuries the last couple of years, but he's a very important part on this team. And if they could add a piece like that that can help them in 2 or 3 years, I think the organization would be over the moon about that.
All right. A lot of the talk we'll do is about the draft and some prospects, but there's also a lot of trades that can happen on draft day. And one of the guys who, of course, has been front and center for, geez, how long, is this guy here, Roberto Luongo. What about Bobby Lou? What are you going to do? What is going to happen with Roberto Luongo?
Well, 2 scenarios I see. They trade him for minimal return and still have to eat probably about $1.5 million a year of the contract, or they just buy him out and let him sign his own deal. They just let this go too long. The window closed, and the NHL landscape has changed so dramatically between the lockout and where they are now. I just don't think there's a hockey trade available for them. They've been talking about it. They've been waiting for it to develop. The goalie market is oversaturated. I don't know what you think about it, Fitz, but I just don't see them getting any tangible assets for Luongo.
I went through every scenario that I could think of, and granted, I'm not very smart, so the scenarios were limited in scope. But before the season, I remember looking at, Toronto was an obvious team that, maybe that they'd look because, think back at the time, nobody knew James Reimer was going to be a plus 920 goaltender. So Toronto, you can probably remove them now, almost certainly. Florida seemed like it'd be a logical fit, but it seems like maybe they want to go and see what Markstrom can do. And before the season, I thought Chicago would have been one of the teams that would have been able to find cap space to get him in. But I think that I have to go back and double check. But I think the Blackhawks did pretty well without him. So I don't know.
That's tremendous insight on your part there, Fitzy. Not a lot of people would pick up on that Stanley Cup thing in the goalie, but that's where you get the big bucks. I think there's kind of a bit of a wild card element in a team like Philly. If they're going to go ahead and sign up Brizgalov, and it's got to be a team that wants to win right now and believe Luongo can be a difference maker. I look at Philly, and they've kind of got that rogue element in their DNA. They do some kooky stuff from time to time. So it's a remote possibility. I wouldn't say it's a strong possibility. Florida has had a chance to pick up Luongo all the way, and the fact that they didn't do it last year, the fact that they basically wasted a year without a goalie, I don't know what's different between this year and last year. Tampa Bay a little similar, they're really unsettled there. Luongo answers a lot of questions, but they had a chance to do that deal last year. So that's the way I see the goaltending landscape in the NHL, at least.
All right, Ed, we're going to pick up a little bit on your ability to get into the history of NHL drafts. This, to me, seems like a pretty strong draft. Obviously, we have McKinnon, we have Seth Jones, we have Jonathan Drouin, we have Darnell Nurse, who's a great defenseman out of Sault Ste. Marie in the Don Mills Flyers organization. How does this draft, talent-wise, do you think, compare to some of the drafts you've seen in years gone by? Are we looking at this as being, top 10 of draft years, or is this a middling crop of players, do you think?
No, from what I understand, and look, I'm not going to try and pass myself off as an expert on this year's crop, but I can tell you what other scouts have told me, that this is probably a top 5 draft. I had one scout say this is definitely the best since that 2003 crop. There's been a couple of other good years. The 79 draft coming out of the folding of the WHA, where all those underage players were recycled back in the draft, is up there. Been a couple of more, but we're not going to be able to judge this accurately, of course, for 5 years, but that top 3, the one guy told me the top 3 everybody talks about is actually a top 5, with the 2 Europeans, the Russian centerman, and then the Russian kid who was playing in Finland. Then he says there's another group of probably about 10 that would include, Max Domi and the Horvat kid who played with London, and a bunch more. And then the interesting part about that is he says basically from 20 to 45, you've got a group that is very similar, and you should still be getting good players in the second round. And when you look at that 03 draft, you look at the players that went in the second round, that second round is almost as good as some years' first round. You got guys like Patrice Bergeron, like Shea Weber, like Louis Eriksson, I believe, all went in that second round, and those are different makers for the franchise. So, I mean, if this draft is anywhere close to that 2003 draft, it's going to be huge for a lot of franchise, especially those teams that have multiple picks in the first round.
Yeah, to me, and Sean and I were talking about this beforehand, there's a lot of intrigue, not only with the level of talent in the draft, but also with teams having to come down under the salary cap for some of them, the compliance buyouts that we've started to see already. I watch the drafts, and so I've seen a bunch of players on, the World Juniors and some junior hockey, but often for me the intrigue is the trades and the activity going on the floor of the draft, as well as the guys who are getting picked. And Sean, why do you watch the draft? What excites you other than sitting on your couch on a June afternoon?
I'm a really boring person, so I like to sit in the basement. That's what I'm going to watch. I don't get out a lot. I live a very sad life. Just getting back to that second round in 2003, by the way, Corey Crawford, noted Stanley Cup champion goaltender, also a second-round draft pick.
Again with Corey Crawford, Shawnee.
Isn't that a thing? Well, I just thought before the season, Chicago can't win with Corey Crawford. They can't possibly. And this is why I don't gamble, Eddie.
Nailed another one, yeah. Well, you weren't alone in that one. You weren't alone in that one. Yeah, I got my NHL cheat sheet here. Yeah, Matt Carl, and then in the third round you got guys like David Backus and Jimmy Howard. It's yeah, that draft. If you missed out on players in that draft, and sorry for bringing this up, people in Toronto, I believe the Leafs didn't pick until the third round in that draft, and that just killed that organization. Not coming out of that draft with at least a couple of prime assets put you so far behind the other teams in the NHL.
What do you have against Martin Sagat?
Sorry?
He's the third-round pick. He's clearly changed the franchise.
Who's that?
Their third-round pick, Martin Sagat.
You see, I probably would have known that. I'm not as fixated on Toronto as as some others. But I think that's the other intriguing part about this.
He went off to play precisely 0 games in the NHL.
Fantastic. I think that's the other reason why this is going to be appointment viewing for real podcasts is I think there's going to be a lot of trading and moving up and moving down and sideways and all the rest. You got the 2 teams with 3 first-rounders. You got 2 other ones with 2 first-rounders, and I think Buffalo has 2 within the top 16. So there's all kinds of it. It's going to be really interesting to watch this one.
I think you're right. So I'm just seeing that Pat Hickey is about to join us from New Jersey, which is good. We all know that Vancouver's 3 hours behind, but New Jersey's in a swamp, so you've got to cut Pat some slack there. As we continue to talk about this, I'm wondering, maybe we've brought up Edmonton and clearly some of the issues they have. Calgary, the Calgary Flames. Does anyone want to take a run at what is going to happen with the Calgary Flames?
Well, I guess I win by geographical proximity. This is an absolutely red-letter day for the Flames organization because you could argue they have drafted the poorest of any NHL team over the last 15 years. I mean, the one impact player they drafted was Dion Phaneuf, who they then gave away to Toronto. And you can also argue how good he can be. But they've got 3 picks in the first round, including the 6th. And they have to start building a foundation for their reset, for their rebuilding program, and it has to happen this year. And I don't see where they're that much farther ahead trading these picks, for somebody who can help them right away. I think they just got to swallow it. The most effective rebuilding jobs are always done by teams who suck mightily for a period of time, accumulate a group of players about the same age, and move forward. And I think Calgary's in that position this year.
It seems like they've sort of put off this whole rebuilding by about 4 seasons, too. This is a process that probably should have started a long time ago.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, they were living in this fantasy world that they were a playoff team, and then once they got in the playoffs, anything could happen. Now, I understand that they had Jerome McGinley, they had Kiprusoff, they had the run in 2004, but they were delusional. Had they moved some of those assets and started this process, they'd be light years ahead of where they are now. But I think they've got to bite the bullet now and go ahead with this. The question is, Calgary's ownership is not very patient, and they're a bit of a wild card. I see Pat. I see Pat
too. There he is, ladies and gentlemen, Pat Hickey.
Live from the Vince Lombardi rat stop on the Jersey Turnpike.
And we can hear you. Hello, Pat. Uh-oh. All right, we can hear Pat.
Fantastic.
We can see Pat. We just can't hear him. Pat, can you... we can almost see you. We can see you. We can't hear you. Now we can see your mouth. Excellent. We're getting closer.
I feel so much better about the only half an hour it took me to log on to this thing now.
All right. I'm not sure why we don't have volume for Pat, but we will try to get volume for Pat as soon as we can. And we'll see if we can get that going as we continue to talk about the Calgary Flames. Fitzy, the Calgary Flames have traded Jerome McGinley. What next? Come on.
When did they do that? Why didn't nobody call me?
About the same time Corey Crawford won the Stanley Cup.
Corey Crawford won the Stanley Cup? Right?
Yeah, this just in.
I think, just as a quick aside, I think it'd actually be more entertaining if Pat Hickey just pantomimed for the rest of this. We don't have to hear him. Just have to sort of, do jazz hands or something like that. I think that'd be a lot of fun. That'd be really enriching for the viewing audience.
All right, do we have Pat?
Oh, damn. Maybe he could act out some of the highlights from that 2002 draft. He can be Ryan Getzlaf shaking hands with Brian Murray, or he can be the New York Islanders drafting Robert Nielsen instead of Zach Parise, and then the angst that enveloped the Islanders fan base soon thereafter. There was great
Don't
drama.
forget Rick Jessamine, the New York Rangers, number 12. Hugh Jessamine? Rick Jessamine? Jessamine something.
Hugh Jessamine. Hugh Jessamine. Yeah, unbelievable. And not only was he a complete bust, he was a complete bust at number 11 in that draft. Like, you had to go so far out of your way to miss, like, just the average guys in that first round who were really good players. That, again, you know, missing in that first round are the Islanders, the Rangers, the Leafs, a couple of other teams. Those were teams that really struggled for the next 4 or 5, in the Leafs' case, 10 years.
All right. Well, so we're going to continue to try to get Pat on the line with volume because we like to see him, but we'd really like to hear him. He is in New Jersey. He's been hanging out with the draft hopefuls.
It's dark in New Jersey.
It's always dark in New Jersey, isn't it? It's a swamp. Come on. All right. So let's see. Does anybody want to take a shot at what the Winnipeg Jets have to do? Because to me, it looks like they're close, but they kind of are falling into that area where Ed was talking about earlier, which is you really have to stink for a while before you can be good. Winnipeg is not stinking. They're on the verge of making the playoffs, much like our beloved Toronto Maple Leafs here were for so long, but just can't get the first pick and can't make the playoffs. Ed, do you see much of the Winnipeg Jets? Obviously more than we did here in Toronto.
A team that's near and dear to my heart. I covered them in their first incarnation right up until the time they left Winnipeg. So I've got a great deal of emotional investment in the Jets. I think from a practical point of view, it's pretty simple for them. I think they've just got to get another good player to add to that group and hope somewhere along the line that, you know, Evander Kane and Bufflin and the young defenseman whose name is I'm drawing a blank on right now. They all kind of develop together and they form the nucleus of a team. I think they're all about the same age group. I think the Jets core players for the most part are kind of in that 22 to 27 to 28-year-old bracket, and that's who they're going to win with ultimately. I'm just not sure I see that that big dramatic move for them this year. I think they've just got to go ahead, draft the best guy available, throw them into the mix they already have and go forward there.
All right, let's see if we can bring Pat in. Pat, it looks like your microphone is being muted by default, which is not exactly how we want to bring you in. So maybe I can try to figure out how to bring you back here. Pat, can you hear us now? Can you see us now? Oh, I'm hearing a little bit of chatter, but I'm not quite hearing Pat the way I want to hear Pat, which is not what we're going for. So, I'm not sure how we're going to solve the issue with Pat Hickey, which is too bad because he is our man in New Jersey. He is the guy we want to talk to as much as Sean Fitzgerald from the National Post and Ed Willis from the Vancouver Province, who have both been... Yes. No offense was meant, of course. But we didn't fly you all the way to New Jersey to just look good, you know.
I did take a drive all the way to Don Mills, though, which is almost the same.
Yeah. As remote. Here in Don Mills, Ontario, for those of you who don't know where we're coming to you live from. So I'm not sure how we're going to get Pat in, but we're going to keep trying to bring Pat Hickey into the conversation. Pat, of course, covers the Montreal Canadiens, the beloved Habs for the Montreal Gazette, and we're trying to bring him in, but we have been unable to do so far. So I am going to move the discussion to the Toronto Maple Leafs, because why not? Sean, we've seen a Bernier acquisition in goal. What do the Leafs need out of this draft?
I don't think it's even so much around the draft as, I mean, they have a bit of a stable of young players that are already in the pipeline. I mean, certainly we talked a little bit off the top about, is Max Domi going to be the legacy name that they pick, or, who are they going to pick up? But, the real important thing, I think even beyond the draft this year, could be some of the movement around it for the Toronto Maple Leafs. You're talking about compliance buyouts. You're talking about, some pending contracts that they're going to have to figure out. This is a team that potentially right now doesn't have a #1 center. They don't have the depth on defense that they need. They have some other questions that they're going to have to address, and I think that all sort of wraps around the draft. And I think that, Mr. Nonis right there is going to be a busy guy this weekend and certainly through the first week of July.
Fitz, did you see them, packaging some of those, good young assets they have together and trying to make that big move to, get the impact player either up front or on the blue line?
I mean, it depends on the packages that are available. I think, there's some interesting sort of background context that I don't quite understand between Randy Carlyle and Jake Gardiner. Jake Gardiner, who I think anybody who hadn't seen him certainly probably would have seen enough of him in that first-round series with the Boston Bruins. He had that concussion coming out of the lockout. For whatever reason, I think he came back a little soon, didn't play quite at his best, landed in Randy Carlisle's doghouse, and then just didn't get out for the whole season. But you can see his potential in the playoffs. And, when you're talking about going for a marquee player, whether it be that center or whether it be somebody like a Chris Letang, was a rumor that was floated earlier this week, that Gardner's name's always involved. And I'm not exactly sure why, other than the fact that he doesn't seem to fit in whatever it is Randy Carlyle has in his mind is a top-line defenseman. But I don't know, listening to Dave Nonis coming out of the lockout where he preached, we're not going to get rid of prospects for a guy who can help us right now, but they'd have to really get somebody who would be that franchise player right now and for the foreseeable future, not a guy who's, Vinny LeCavalier 33 and breaking down, to really help them in the long term. It doesn't make sense to give up like a Nazem Kadri and at least not to these eyes. And again, I'm not very smart, but a Nazem Kadri and a Jake Gardiner for something right away.
But you think if they package that first-round pick along with Gardiner, along with the Joe Colburn or somebody of that ilk, that's a fairly attractive package. I think that would net them, a fair bit. What's their pick?
They're down at 21. So it's
I thought it was a little.
It's not the glitter and gold.
Made the playoffs this year, but not so much. Yeah, but again, interesting historical context. The year Dave got fired in Vancouver, he was they had the 10th overall pick, and it was the Cody Hodgson draft. So I think that's 2008. But he was going to deal that pick for an impact player right away, and it was going to be either Mike Camilleri or somebody of that ilk who got moved at the draft. So there's some, there's a bit of a history there. I'm just not sure where he sits this year. They're an intriguing team, the Leafs. I would think they're a little like what we talked about. They're a little like Winnipeg. I'm just not sure if reaching for that bold move, I'm just not sure if it's the time right now. I think they're better off adding another young asset to that group, and I would just love it to be Max Domi. I think that would be absolutely. It's just such a terrific story on so many different levels.
Well, there's an interesting thing about the Leafs too, is that the advanced statistics community really believes that what happened in this regular season is a mathematical aberration. That they were chanced so hard, so fiercely. That they gave up so many quality scoring chances night after night after night that, over the course of an 82-game season, that they're due for a regression next year. That if they ice the same team next year, if they say, well, we made the playoffs and we gave the Stanley Cup Finals a good run, and they stay pat, that as it stands without change, they could regress and miss the playoffs next year.
Actually, that's fantastic on two levels. One, the point. The other thing is that you actually read some of those sites. That's the really incredible thing in my I've been a sort of a closet analytic, guys, going back to Bill James in the early '80s, and I know it's the new trend in hockey circles, and I know it's the way the kind of blogging community sets itself apart from the mainstream press. And I've looked at it, and I just don't see where those things are as applicable. I think they're an interesting tool. I think they shed some light on some things. But
guys, I'm going to break in here for a second.
Hang on. Have we got Pat?
We have Pat Hickey. I could hear Pat Hickey. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Pat.
That's great.
It's a great moment. It's a great moment for posting.
It's only taken 38 minutes.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have. Goodbye.
Pat, your large orange head is scaring some of the children who'll be watching, though.
So, Pat, now that we have you, thank you for joining us from New Jersey. What is going on in New Jersey?
Well, there's nothing much, until the draft comes up, but there has been a lot of talk about players being bought out. The top prospects met with the media today. I don't think there's any suspense now, looking at what's happening coming up. It looks like Colorado's going to take Nathan McKinnon, and then it's just a question of who takes Drouin and Seth Jones with the next two picks. A bit of a surprise. I think McKinnon was the consensus #1 pick for a long time. Then Seth Jones came on, but it looks like Patrick Roy's influence in Colorado, having seen Nathan McKinnon for a couple of seasons now, and it just makes sense that he's familiar with the player, and I guess he feels like Colorado needs more offensive help than they need on defense.
Yeah, well, McKinnon,
actually, Colorado needs everything.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for me. We see a lot of Colorado. Obviously, they've been playing in the Canucks division, and they've got like this terrific stable of young players, but like they're kind of all over the map. There's no cohesion there, and then they've got nothing on the back end. So, I mean, they kind of become a little bit like the Edmonton Oilers light for me if they take McKinnon. I mean, maybe this kid's great, but they were saying the same things about Taylor Hall and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins when they came out. That's going to be an interesting one for me, because if they draft him, they're going to have to start looking to trade a Ryan O'Reilly or a Matt Duchene, I believe. I'm just not sure they can keep all those young forwards and pay them what they need to be paid.
Yeah, so Pat, we have talked about a number of the Canadian franchises so far. We haven't yet talked about the Montreal Canadiens. They're obviously not drafting at the top of the draft this year, finally. What are we looking at from Montreal this year?
Well, I think they're looking at what they think is going to be a pretty good draft. They've got they're drafting 25th with the first-round pick, but then if you look down, they've got 2 picks early in the second round, 34 and 36. They've got another pick in the second round. They have 2 picks in the third round. And Mark Bergevin, who is convinced that the only way to build this team is through the draft, figures they're going to get some pretty good draft picks. And if he points out the fact that if you look at their playoff roster, the 28 players they finished up with at the end of the season, 18 of those players were drafted by the Canadiens, and or 18 of them were Canadiens' homegrown products. 15 of them were drafted by the Canadiens. 3 of them they signed as undrafted free agents. So you're in a situation, where you look at those guys. Only 4 of them, Galchenyuk, Carey Price, Max Pacioretty, and Jared Tenorti, were drafted in the first round. So the Canadiens believe that the important thing is to do a good job, do your homework in the draft, and then develop these players in the proper manner. And they've spent a lot of time and effort this year adding people on the development side of it, people like Marty Lapointe and Patrice Brisebois. They just picked up Shane Churla, and they feel this is important now to try to get as much of that development work done and concentrate on that effort. And they feel that if they've done the job in the draft, and they've done a very good job in the last couple of years of picking guys in the second, third, fourth rounds, PK Subban, for example. And so, I mean, that's going to be the key, is they feel they're going to get lots of players, 9 players in total, and they can go from there.
Yeah, this is obviously a better year for the Canadiens. They had a good regular season and some trouble in the playoffs. Is there much concern as we head into the draft about Carey Price, or is that just the media outside of Montreal blowing that up?
Well, I mean, certainly it's going to be, they need him to play better. And the fact that they've replaced they haven't replaced the goaltender coach yet, but they fired the goaltender coach that they've had, Pierre Drew. His main asset, I mean, I think he was a pretty good coach, but I think one of the things he might have been is a little too easy with Carey Price, and I think what they need is somebody to push him a little harder. One of the big complaints for Rolly Melanson was the goaltending coach there, and the reason why Melanson was told to move on was the fact that he thought that Carey was a little lazy and had to work harder in practice, and that's one of the things that the new goaltending coach will be expected to do. Carey Price is one of these guys who's one of the first guys out on the ice, and he usually stays out afterwards, but he usually stays out there to shoot the puck. And, I think what they'd like him to do, is spend a little more time stopping the puck rather than shooting it.
I think we need to bring goaltending expert Sean Fitzgerald in on this one. Fitzy, where do you sit on the Carey Price shooting versus stopping point?
Corey Crawford won the Stanley Cup.
That's all you know. That's all I'm saying.
Corey Crawford, Chicago Blackhawks.
All right, we have established so far, for those of you who are joining late, that Corey Crawford did win the Stanley Cup, that Ed Willis is joining us.
Doesn't need a goalie now.
And Chicago doesn't need a goalie. Ed Willis is joining us from the Vancouver province. Pat Hickey is in New Jersey, and he is the hockey columnist for the Montreal Gazette. Sean Fitzgerald is with us from the National Post. There he is waving at you. He covers hockey, obviously, here in Toronto and beyond for the Post. So, hard question, but it lets you blue sky a bit. What do you think will be the surprise of draft day? We're going to start with the man we've been picking on a lot because he joined us late, Pat Hickey. Any surprises you're looking for on draft day?
I don't know whether there'll be any surprises. I think the big surprise will be if the Canadians pick a goaltender in the first round. They will pick a goaltender somewhere in this draft. Zach Pacal, who's the Halifax goaltender, has been mentioned as a possible. At least one mock draft has the Canadians picking him. But I think they'll go a little bit later with a goaltender. The other thing will be interesting to see whether they pick a French-Canadian player or two. They've had a lot of criticism in the last couple of years for not picking more French-Canadian players, letting players like Patrice Bergeron and Claude Giroux get away from them. So they'll be under some pressure to look at the players who are available in the queue. One of the things that is in their favor this year is there are some really good quality players. This is one of the best years that the queue will have in the draft for several years now, and I would be surprised if the Canadians don't pick a French-Canadian player from the queue with one of those first three picks, the late first-round choice or one of those two early second-round choices.
I hear the French-Canadian player that Habs fans really want is Vincent Lecavalier. Apparently he's not available in the draft, but be interesting to see what the Habs do there.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they make a play.
All right, let's look.
I'd be surprised if they make a play for him. He's going to cost too much money. He's going to want too many years.
Fair enough. Ed, let's go to you. Any surprises you're looking for draft day?
Yeah, what I'm going to be really interested in is the trades and then the potential for trade with, as we talked about before, the teams with multiple picks in the first round who have some needs, and in this draft where there should be good value, picks 1 through 45, 1 through 50, depending how you look at it. I think that's going to be a really interesting one for me. I think you're going to see some pretty big trades this year involving draft picks, but also involving impact players in the NHL right now. And that's good for the game. I think it helps promote discussion. It generates fan interest. The NHL trade deadline has been a kind of an anticlimax for me for the last couple of years. So this is almost the new de facto trade deadline. I'm looking for some activity.
All right, Sean, I liked Ed's choice there. What about you? What are you looking for surprise-wise on draft day?
I think it's something along the same lines that you look at, there's a group of teams in the league right now that are going to be challenged by the fact that the cap is going down next year. And I think that there are other teams that are positioned to sort of capitalize on that. And to build into Ed's point, I think that's going to contribute to a lot of movement. Maybe not right away, tonight or even earlier this weekend, but certainly once free agent season starts and you can start getting those players under contract and moving. But I think there are going to be some teams that are going to be seeking relief from the cap as it goes down, and you apply that in with the compliance buyouts and the possibilities there. That yes, I think that everything points to, as boring as the trade deadline was, again, we're notwithstanding this past winter, I think there is going to be a fair bit of movement, and you throw that in with what is by consensus one of the deepest drafts in the last decade. I think if you are going to be a shut-in and you're going to spend Canada Day weekend staring at a television, there could be worse weekends in which to do it.
All right. I am going to call a halt to these proceedings right now, and I am going to thank Sean Fitzgerald from the National Post, Pat Hickey from the Montreal Gazette, and Ed Willis from the Vancouver Province for joining me, and for all of you. We had quite a lot of viewers watching us, including, I understand, at Jump the Shark from England. So we appreciate all of you joining us today. And
thanks, Mr. Shark. Is that his real name, by the way, Jump the Shark?
Absolutely. Maybe you've seen him on TV. We will, of course, have full draft coverage all the way through the weekend, and you can also find us all on Twitter. And we are going with a hashtag PN Draft, which is, of course, for Post Media News Draft. But Pat Hickey, Ed Willis, Sean Fitzgerald, thank you very much for joining me and being part of our NHL Draft video chat. Have a good day.
Take care, fellas.
Bye, everybody. See you, Fitz.
See you later.